We are through 4 weeks of the NFL season, and there are some players who are quickly rising up the rankings. You want to know who these players are because it allows you to target them and try and acquire them before they're untouchable players. These are the players that are skyrocketing up the rankings before week 5. And let's begin with DeAndre Swift, who in week 3, his usage was still solid, but not great with Kenneth Gainwell returning. As you can see here, in week 3, Swift only played 54% of the snaps, only saw 42% of the rush attempts. Now, he had a nice game, 14.8 points, but it was hard to get excited because he was splitting the backfield with Gainwell. But in week 4, this all changed. We've been asking for it for years, got the workhorse usage from DeAndre Swift. As you can see from the Fantasy Life data on the screen, this is free data, by the way, anybody can use it. In week 4, Swift saw 64% of the snaps and 58% of the rush attempts. He turned this solid usage into yet another good fantasy performance, finding the end zone for the second time this year, nearly 18 fantasy points on 79 total yards and 18 touches. This is workhorse RB1 usage. In this same game, Kenneth Gainwell only saw 4 carries, 37% of the snaps, all a season low, and Rashad Penny and Boston Scott didn't play. Swift now ranks 6th in running back points over the past 3 games. He has been a top 10 back. And the dude just continues to be efficient. He's been efficient his entire career, but this year it's continuing. He's 2nd in true yards per carry, and he's 8th in yards per touch. Since he entered the NFL, he's top 5 in yards per touch. Yet again, 5.9 yards per touch. This would have ranked 2nd in the NFL last year. So you have this efficient running back who's playing really well, and now, yeah, he's behind the #1 run blocking unit in the NFL. This is exactly what's going to happen. Consistent production that you're seeing these past 3 games. And Swift is quietly putting together the cheat code fantasy usage. He ranks 6th in red zone usage so far right now. In week 1, he barely even played, and he's seen 9 targets the last 3 games. Now, heading into week 5, he's a 4-point favorite against the Rams, who rank 25th in tackling, and Swift ranks 13th in broken tackles. So this is a good matchup yet again for DeAndre Swift. Not only is he a top 12 running back this week, he's a top 12 running back the rest of the season. Now let's talk about a wide receiver in his division on the New York Giants, and that is Bijon Robinson, who actually returned before this past week. He returned in week 3 from injury. And his usage in week 3 wasn't good. He was coming off of a major injury, so they kind of just ramped him up. He only ran 25% of the routes. But look at this. His TPRR, that is targets per route run, 56% of the routes he ran, he earned a target. That is 5 targets on 9 routes. Now, of course, that's a small sample, but just for comparison, Tyreek Hill led the NFL last year with a 34% target rate. He had a 56% target rate on a small sample last week, Mr. Bijon Robinson. And look, this is all this guy has done his whole career. Even when you look back to college, his final year at Kentucky, 39% of the targets, his top 1% production of all time. It led to over 100 receptions, over 1,300 yards. This guy can earn targets and produce. Now, in week 4, on Monday Night Football against the Seahawks, we saw him take a major leap forward in his usage. Robinson ended up going from running 25% of the routes in week 3 to 63% of the routes in week 4. He earned 20% of the targets. He was the #2 wide receiver on this team. Only Darius Slayton saw more snaps and routes run for the Giants. So this is great usage, but the concern is where he was seeing his targets. Because so far through 2 games, he's earned 11 targets. And as you can see here, his average target yards per target is just 4.2 yards downfield. So it's really hard to get explosive plays unless you're elite after the catch, which he's good after the catch, but it's hard to keep that up. But of course, this is a really small sample. He was limited in week 3, and then he started seeing his usage ramped up last week, so this can still change. And heading into this week, he's in a pretty good game environment for fantasy. Look, they're 11-point underdogs to the Dolphins on the road, this New York Giants team. But the Dolphins secondary ranks bottom 10 in the NFL through 4 weeks, so the Giants are going to pass a lot, which should mean more targets for Bijon. So if you have Bijon Robinson, start him this week. If he's available on waivers, he's a good flex option. Now we must talk about Breece Hall, who is skyrocketing up the ranks at the perfect time. Over the past 2 weeks, Breece Hall leads this backfield, playing 47% of the snaps and 49% of the rush attempts, and this is while being on a snap count. Now, 3 RBs have been involved in this backfield the entire season, but Robert Saleh just announced that Breece Hall no longer has a snap count, so expect him to see more usage. And it's not like these other guys have done anything good. Dalvin Cook played just 25% of the snaps last week. He only earned 6 opportunities, and he ranks dead last out of any running back with 30 or more carries. He is dead last in yards per carry. And then there's Michael Carter, who's playing like 25 to 30% of the snaps and basically just running like 10 to 15 routes a week. That's been pulling away from Breece Hall, but now without a snap count for Hall, that should change. The takeaway here is that Hall's role is improving at the perfect time, and now he doesn't have a snap count. And it's the perfect time because this week the Jets face the dead last ranked Broncos defense. They're only 2-point underdogs. If this was played on a neutral site, they'd actually be 1-point favorites. And here's the deal. They just gave up over 120 total yards last week this Broncos defense to Khalil Herbert. And newsflash, Breece Hall is a much more efficient and better overall talent than Khalil Herbert. Herbert's good, Hall is great. So expect the running back in Breece Hall, who's already averaging 6.8 yards per touch this year, and now he's going to see more touches because he's going to get more snaps. Expect him to see a really good game and find the end zone for the first time this year against the Broncos. And it is the perfect stretch of games for him. He's going to have a tough matchup at home against the Eagles, but then he has good matchups against the Chargers, the Giants. You can scroll down even more. the Raiders. These are all solid matchups, including this week against the Broncos. So now is the perfect time to acquire Breece Hall, and it's the perfect time to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this content and finding it helpful. 70% of people who watch aren't subscribed. Be sure to change that. It allows you to see my future content. The next man up is Alvin Kamara, who returned from suspension in week 4 and saw great usage. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He was the clear running back one for the Saints. He played 75% of the snaps, handled 61% of the opportunities, and ran, as he always does, elite passing game usage 70% of the routes. And this led to a pretty nice game for Kamara. He ends up seeing 24 total touches, 14 targets, and 13 catches. Yeah, he wasn't super efficient as a receiver. Just 33 receiving yards on 13 catches was a record, believe it or not, but over 20 fantasy points, we take it. This dude benefited the most from the Derek Carr shoulder injury. Derek Carr's average air yard downfield was just 1 yard. He could not throw downfield. He was checking it down and throwing screens, mostly to Alvin Kamara. And his shoulder injury isn't going to be 100% healed this week, so expect this same type of production out of Carr the next few weeks. And if indeed they continue to roll out an injured Carr, yeah, Kamara is going to continue to see strong targets, and his running mates in this backfield last week when he returned played 15 snaps, only saw 1 rush attempt. This is the Alvin Kamara show yet again. And that Alvin Kamara show goes on the road in week 5 against a tough Patriots defense, top 5 in tackling, top 5 run defense. But here's the deal. If we're going to see 5 to 6 plus receptions for Kamara, that is fine. So he's skyrocketing up the rankings, and so is this next receiver. And that would be Chris Godwin, who's been a buy low option all season for us, depending on if it's my Yahoo piece we talk about it, if it's in the trade for video that we've talked about Chris Godwin, and last week he finally came through. Because in week 4, you got the big game out of Chris Godwin. Over 20 fantasy points, 11 targets, goes over 100 yards for the first time this year. All of this production, the receptions, the targets were season highs. And part of this production came from the fact that Mike Evans left the game. The older wide receiver, 30 years old, he had a hamstring injury, wasn't able to return, was basically immediately ruled out. Now the Bucs do have a bye in week 5, so it does give him some time to recover for Mike Evans, but here's the deal. It says on average a 3-week recovery. Evans, who's an older receiver, can still miss some time. And believe it or not, through 4 games, in 3 of these games, Baker Mayfield has looked really good. Both under pressure, he's being protected. The Bucs have the number 2 offensive line, believe it or not, right now in the entire league, and all of this is helping Chris Godwin. Baker is completing 70% of his passes this season and averaging over 7 yards per attempt. He is quite literally playing some of the best football of his career. So of course you're going to continue to start Godwin, but yeah, if you can still buy low on him even after this game, you should do so, because he is very quietly earning over 25% of the targets in this team. That is top 20 in the league, but really nobody is viewing him as a top 20 fantasy option right now. And one more thing, it's only a matter of time until he finds the end zone. His 5 red zone targets are the 4th most amongst receivers, but he has 0 touchdowns. That is going to change if this usage continues. So the veteran in Godwin is rising up the rest of season rankings, and so is this sneaky-ish wide receiver. He's not super sneaky if you were trying to fight with him on the waiver wire last week with your fab budget, but yeah, Josh Palmer for the Chargers started his first game last week without Mike Williams, and it was fantastic. Palmer ran 97% of the routes in this game. He actually ran more routes and played more snaps than Keenan Allen, and look at this. His target share earned 35% of the targets. That would have led the NFL last year, that number. Now, of course, this is just one game, but he saw 8 targets, double Keenan Allen, led the entire team in week 5. And he was seeing the downfield usage. His average target distance on those 8 targets was 18 yards downfield, which will lead to big plays like you saw when he had a 50-plus yard reception. Now, there was some people believing that maybe the rookie Quentin Johnson would just take over Josh Palmer's role right away and jump him the first-round pick. That didn't happen. Now, Johnson did become a starting wide receiver, but only in 3 wide receiver sets, playing 69% of the routes, only earning 3 targets. So now, after this game, Palmer has played 6 games in his career without Mike Williams, and he averages 12.6 fantasy points and a strong 8.3 targets per game. This is borderline top 25 wide receiver production, and he's playing with a quarterback who right now looks like an MVP candidate. Yeah, Justin Herbert has been good this year. He leads all quarterbacks, completing 79% of his passes. That's his true completion percentage when you take away throwaways and batted down passes and drops. Now, the Chargers are on a bye this week, but after the bye, they have nice matchups against teams like the Bears and the Kansas City Chiefs. Go ahead and continue to start, pick up, or acquire Josh Palmer. Now, let's talk about David Montgomery, who is a top 12 running back the rest of the season. We were declaring him all offseason the best pick in the middle rounds at the running back, whether it was round 7, 8, or 9 that you got him, and yeah, it's coming true. Because in week 4 on Thursday Night Football, and he was originally ruled out for this game, but then they said it was an accident and he was ruled in, well, he played a commanding 70% of the snaps and earned 76% of the rush attempts. And even more surprising, he saw more routes run, the majority of the routes, compared to Jahmyr Gibbs, who's supposed to be the passing down back. And this led to the massive game of 34 total touches. He goes for 140 plus yards, over 30 fantasy points, because he scores 3 times. And this is the type of upside that he has, not just this week, but every single week. Because in week 4, we saw exactly what the Lions want to be, a team that only throws around 30 times and runs the ball through David Montgomery behind a top 5 offensive line. And if anything, this usage for Montgomery isn't going to get worse, it's going to get better, because he's running most of the routes, but he only saw 2 targets in this past game because he was busy carrying the ball 32 times. But those targets, there's going to be games where he sees 5 or 6 targets, has 4 or 5 receptions, which just lifts his floor from a PPR half PPR standpoint. And of course, he has the elite red zone role that we saw Jamal Williams have last year when Jamal Williams had 45 carries inside the 10-yard line. Expect another big week from Montgomery this week because he's a borderline 10-point favorite against the Carolina Panthers. They are at home, and the Panthers, yeah, they rank 29th against the run and 24th in tackling. Another 20-plus game and a touchdown should be on the docket for Montgomery. Now we got to talk about Bijon Robinson, who obviously everybody has seen the highlights. They've seen the production. This guy is great, but he's actually a top 5 overall player in fantasy the rest of the season. That's how good he is. Because in week 4, we saw a huge step forward for Bijon's usage, and it was kind of under the radar because they played the morning game in London against the Jaguars. In this game, he still saw his normal 75% of the snaps. He's been playing, as you can see here, 74% of the snaps this season, but look at this. His rush attempts hit a season-high 67% of the rush attempts in this backfield over Tyler Algier. Those have increased now every single week since week 1. The translation is that Algier has become much less involved, and Bijon is flirting with Christian McCaffrey level usage. And here's what this usage led to. Even in a game where the offense and Desmond Ridder struggled to move the ball or put together any types of drives against the Jaguars and they trailed the whole game, well, Bijon still earned 19 total touches, over 130 total yards, and without even scoring a touchdown, he goes over 21 fantasy points. This is similar to, this is visions of what you got to see when Christian McCaffrey was on the Panthers with quarterbacks like Kyle Allen. So earlier this year, after week 1, we were concerned that Tyler Algier was actually going to make this a split backfield. Well, he only had 7 carries for 16 yards last week. So we could put that narrative to rest, and we could easily declare Bijon Robinson the best running back in fantasy, not named Christian McCaffrey, for the rest of the season. Because the fella has been incredibly efficient this year. He's 3rd in yards per touch, 2nd in yards created, and 1st in running back route participation. Now this week, the Falcons are home favorites, which is going to be something rare this year because they're facing the Texans, who rank, oh yeah, dead last against the run. So expect another 100-plus yard game and even a touchdown this week for Bijon. He's clearly a great asset to have on your team, and another asset that you should have to help your team improve, well, that would be the fantasy blueprint that thousands of people, 2,500 people, are currently using to win their matchups each week and also to win their fantasy league. You can see right here, I will send you each of these tools every day of the week via email, the waiver wire tools, the projections, rest of season rankings, game-by-game matchup notes. Every single day something is coming your way. And this is an example of those game-by-game notes. You can go game-by-game or position-by-position, whichever way you want to look at it. Look, I have detailed notes for every single fantasy relevant running back for the specific week and their matchup, and you can just see some of them right here, what their usage has been, what the yards after contact and overall defensive rankings are, what the offensive line rankings are, and what these matchups will look like so you have the edge over your league mates. The blueprint is very simple to get. Almost 3,000 people have acquired it. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And outside of the great information it has in it, maybe the next best thing is that this is risk-free. It's only $5 for the entire year. That's also good, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund that $5. No questions asked. It doesn't matter if somebody got hurt, you get it right back. So yes, this offer is completely risk-free. So to join the 3,000 or so people who currently have the blueprint, scan the QR code on the screen to get access or click the link in the description below. Next man up is De'Von Achane, and obviously this guy's the definition of skyrocketing up the rankings because he went from playing like 3 snaps to week 2 to then scoring 50-plus fantasy points the following week. But when he scored those 50-plus points against Denver, he was still operating behind Raheem Mostert as a running back too, but that changed in week 4. Because as you can see, these snap progressions, in week 2 he's barely used, just 8%. Then against Denver he goes off, only 42% of the snaps, but this past week in week 4 he was the lead back, playing 66% of the snaps, 47% of the carries, and 68% of the routes. That route number is elite. This was all more usage than Raheem Mostert, and he ends up turning just 11 touches into 120 yards, nearly 30 fantasy points, and another multiple touchdown performance. So far in the 2 games where he was actually used, he's finished as the running back 1 and the running back 5 in fantasy on just 35 total touches. And check out how crazy efficient he's been. This is a small-ish sample, so obviously this will drop, but he's averaging 10.3 yards per touch. The NFL leader last year was around 6 yards per touch, 8.7 yards per carry. I think we all know that that is historic. If he somehow keeps that up, will blow every other running back in NFL history out of the water. This won't keep up, but it's showing you how dynamic he is in the number 1 offense with Mike McDaniel calling plays. He's getting put in open space, and he can make men miss, and he has elite track speed, the fastest running back at this past NFL Combine. And things will only continue this week. He's a top 10 running back this week as an 11-point home favorite with a massive team total against the Giants' bottom 5 run defense. Now, I actually believe you can sell high on De'Von Achane. Maybe you want to do it after this week when he has another good game against the Giants, but if you can get an elite player, a Tony Pollard level player, a Jamar Chase level player, why not do it? But if you can't get a top tier first round talent type stud back, then hold him because he's in a really good spot. And speaking of guys in really good spots, Anthony Richardson is just set up for success in Indianapolis because he's a top 5 quarterback the rest of the season, and here's why. Check out this tweet I posted. Anthony Richardson ranks 10th in quarterback points this season, over 74 points, but he's only played 10 quarters, just 2.5 games. He's missed a game and a half, and he's still in the top 10. He's 3rd in points per game. This is how good Richardson is. Despite only completing 11 passes in week 4, he still went for 200 yards, multiple passing touchdowns, and over 30 fantasy points. Now, he was a lot less efficient in terms of his accuracy when he was 68% of his completions in week 1 compared to this past week, less than 50%, because this right here, look at the A dot. In week 4, his average depth of target was 14 yards downfield. That is more than double what he was doing, close to triple what he was doing on average before this game. The translation there is instead of some of the short to intermediate passes, he was basically throwing on average downfield, and it's harder to complete those passes. They were playing from behind and he was getting trigger happy. I expect head coach Shane Steichen to take note of this and adjust moving forward to what was successful the first week of the year and also successful with Gardner Minshew in this offense. And oh yeah, Richardson of course has the overall cheat code why he was being taken as a top 10 quarterback in drafts. He already has 131 rushing yards in just 10 quarters, 4 rushing touchdowns, and 23 carries. Now next up is a home matchup against the Titans, who you can throw on this team. They have a bottom 10 secondary. They do stop the run, but it's a little bit different when literally the version in the NFL of LeBron James is back there playing quarterback. I'm sure he's still going to get his on the ground as well. So expect the rushing success to continue, and then also expect a little bit of a better passing performance in week 5. Now let's quickly hit on Marquise Brown from the Cardinals. He's a top 20 wide receiver right now. He was our favorite 7th round pick for most of the offseason. It's paying off with 17 fantasy points in 3 straight games. And he's done this despite facing the Dallas and San Francisco defense, 2 of the 5 best defenses in the NFL. Expect this to continue this week when he takes on the Bengals. We also must address that we said, hey, don't trade DJ Moore just yet. Just hang on to him. That was in the video and the pieces last week for trade away players and trade for players, because look, he has good matchups coming up. What does he do? A career best game or a season best game, 131 yards, 9 targets, and he still has good matchups on the horizon. So keep riding DJ Moore, who is quietly a top 10 wide receiver the past 3 games in fantasy. Now we talked in the waiver video about adding Jake Ferguson, but I have to mention him here about skyrocketing up the rankings because he's been a top 8 tight end the past 3 games. And just look at how good his usage has been. He ran 70% of the routes to season high. His usage has increased every single game and saw 7 targets, was a top 5 tight end last week. And he's tied with Devontae Adams for the most red zone targets this year, so touchdowns are coming. This is a borderline top 5 tight end the rest of the season. If he's available on waivers, pick him up. And if you're in like a 12-man league or deeper, you definitely have to pick up Marvin Mims, who ran a season high 39% of the routes last week. He leads the Denver Broncos in receiving yards, and he leads every wide receiver in the NFL in yards per route run. He's been really efficient. And that's exactly what he was doing in college as an efficient downfield receiver, averaging 20 yards per catch. Hey, Brandon Ayuk returned last week, and Brock Purdy continued to look really good, so Brandon Ayuk now continues to rise up the rankings because this dude is just earning targets when he's out there. So far in the season, through 3 games, in which one of those games he left early, he is earning 28% of his team's targets. That is 13th best in the NFL, and it's probably not going to stop continuing because this offense, the offensive line, the quarterback is all gelling smoothly in San Francisco right now. Ayuk is easily a top 20 wide receiver moving forward, and he has top 10 upside. Now, Zay Flowers, the rookie, very quietly this season has looked really good for the Ravens. He's averaging a 30% target share, 30% through 4 games. That would have ranked top 5 amongst receivers last year. He is somebody that you have to continue to start even in difficult matchups. The dude is just seeing too much usage, and he's only played 4 career NFL games. It's only going to get better with more experience. And speaking of 4 career NFL games and getting better, CJ Stroud now has the 2nd most passing yards ever through your first 4 games. Only Cam Newton has more. Another 300-yard game last week. He was picked up a ton on waivers. If he's still out there, you got to add him. He's a top 10 quarterback the rest of the season. So these are players that are skyrocketing up my rankings before week 5. Now, if you want to see the guys who are actually falling down my rankings and maybe it's the perfect time to sell him, well, check out this video right here that it'll help you improve your fantasy team by seeing who you should trade away. And if you made it to the end and you're one of the 70% of people who are not subscribed to this channel, but you do find it helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button as we push towards 100,000 subscribers, and it will allow you to see my future content.